Welcome everybody to the Workplace Reimagined here at Fayetteville Public Library. I have a really good-natured panel here tonight to talk about the process of co-working and shared workspaces. Our moderator, Jeff Amrine, is the founder and managing director of Startup Junkie Consulting. He has held senior leadership positions in 9 startups and 3 Fortune 500 companies and made more than 80-plus angel investments into new ventures and small businesses either directly or through the funds he manages. Jeff now leads Startup Junkie Consulting and Cadron Capital Partners. In addition, he is an adjunct professor and teaches entrepreneurship. I'm going to say entrepreneurship probably 20 times tonight and bunch it up at least 10 of those. Entrepreneurship at the Sam Walton College of Business. Caleb Talley is the executive director of Startup Junkie Foundation. He joined the team in 2019 as the marketing and events director, where he was responsible for planning and carrying out the foundation's portfolio of events and workshops that are geared to serve the local entrepreneurial community. Caleb also serves on Fayetteville's Public Access Education and Government Television Board, and he has helped create several entrepreneurial television programs featured on Fayetteville Public Television. Mallory Berry is the founder and studio and events manager at Likewise. She can answer anything regarding the co-working community, creative studios, and events. Mallory has also owned MGB Photo, operating out of Fayetteville and Chicago for over a decade. Reese Roberts is the operations manager at Likewise. She joined the Likewise team in November 2020 after 15 years in the restaurant industry, most recently as general manager at Bordino's. When some of her fellow restaurant owners and operators were forced to lay off staff in March of 2020, they founded the Fayetteville Independent Restaurant Alliance to help displaced hospitality workers and professionals pay their bills. Reese loves working with people and orchestrating large operations and events, which is why she enjoys being part of the Likewise team. Zoe Buenayuto serves as the Associate Director of Entrepreneurship Initiatives within the Office of Entrepreneurship and Innovation at the University of Arkansas. She oversees Startup Village, which is a program offering free co-working space to young founders across 2 locations in Northwest Arkansas, and Venture Mentoring Service, an initiative pairing entrepreneurs with teams of industry experts to support their business growth. That was a mouthful. I'm really happy that you guys are here tonight and you're going to share with those of us in the room and those of us who are watching via live stream what co-working is all about. It looks very glamorous, and I see lots of very beautiful buildings, and I just wonder how all that works. So hopefully you will let us know tonight. Thank you.
Thanks so much for having us. So let's go ahead and get this conversation started here about co-working. I'll kind of give you a perspective of someone that has seen this sort of thing for a while. I reflect back on the 1990s when I had a startup going. I was in the Washington, D.C. area, and we were actually in a Regis facility. And it was kind of co-working before they really knew how to label co-working. It wasn't nearly as cool. It was just kind of a stuffy office space. But we've come a long way since. We've seen things like Grind Space, and we've seen things like WeWork, the ups and downs there. We've seen it work in a bunch of different geographies, not just the highly dense places. So with that as kind of a backdrop, we're going to start to kind of go around the panel here. And Zoe, I'm going to start with you. When you think about co-working and you think about your experience and what you do at the U of A, when did you get interested in this concept of co-working, and how does the U of A do that today?
Sure. So when I think about my experience with co-working, I think about my need for dedicated space when I was a graduate student. A space that wasn't a library, which, although libraries are wonderful, it wasn't open in the hours where I was most productive. It wasn't a cafe, which ultimately cost me a lot of money and put me kind of at odds with cafe owners because I was camping out for many, many hours. I needed a dedicated space where I could go that also wasn't my apartment, which at that time was a 300 square foot studio in New York. that gave me, again, dedicated space that was accessible when I needed it, but that also gave me a social outlet to connect with other people during what is typically a bit of a lonely time, grad school and dissertation writing. In my role at the U of A, it, for the past several years, has been clear that entrepreneurs have enough to worry about when they're working on a new venture. Paying for office space is not possible for many. And so administrators at the University of Arkansas, administrators from my office, the Office of Entrepreneurship and Innovation, realized that there was a real moment or a real opportunity for the university to provide free office space to student ventures. And so we began that in 2019 and 2020 at a building just off of Dixon Street here in Fayetteville. We recently expanded that program to provide office space in Bentonville to entrepreneurs out of the Collaborative, which is a university building there. And although this resource really is for university-affiliated entrepreneurs, we're proud to take a pretty generous interpretation of what affiliation means in the hopes that we can ease the burden for folks that are really trying to have that dedicated space and avoid significant costs during a critical time.
It's pretty important now, especially as rents have increased and as popular areas have become more popular, like Northwest Arkansas. There's maybe even a higher demand now than there would have been some years back. I mean, Mallory, is that a fair comment from your perspective? Are you seeing lots of inbound interest at Likewise?
I would say so. I think that basically once a lot of companies went fully remote, that was when a lot of our space started filling up. Mm-hmm. There were a lot of people who were just going stir crazy at home. They wanted a private office or a shared space just to get out of the house or away from the kids or whatever that might be.
So the pandemic was really a driver in some ways for you. It drove people towards that situation because after a period of time in isolation, they were probably like, let me go anywhere other than here. And you really can't get the same kind of experience at a coffee shop, right? I mean, eventually the coffee shop owners are going to run you out if you're not reordering coffee.
That is what we tell people, is the coffee is included and you don't have to worry about overstaying your welcome.
Exactly. They're not going to cut the Wi-Fi. You're not going to cut the Wi-Fi off in the middle of important work. Well, so Caleb, what do you think? Based on we've had the sort of limited co-working there at Center Space. What's your take on all this?
Yeah, I think from my perspective of, I would consider, our space where our team works is kind of a shared, it might not be traditional co-working space because it's just for our team, but it is designed in a way where we are kind of sharing and co-working with one another, and then also having that space attached to us where the public can come and engage without, without kind of a membership or anything like that, just free flowing. Granted, there are limitations because
Right.
It is free and only open when we're there. But I definitely see the benefits of working in that kind of environment. I think COVID, I'll admit, the pandemic spoiled me in regards to kind of, I guess, the culture of being at my desk or being in a traditional work setting, 9 to 5, that sort of thing, going from rolling out of bed to the laptop wherever I was. And so being able to have that flexibility, I think is critical.
It seems like things are kind of settling into a hybrid approach where you need to be there when you need to be there. You can still work remote, but it's definitely good for the team and everybody if there are kind of key points when you can come in and co-work together. And that, I would say, Reese, I'd be interested in your perspective as you look at the professions in addition to startups and freelancer. What are the professions where co-working is really kind of a good fit?
Well, we actually have people across all industries. We even have a candle maker and a ceramic studio in our space. We've had other creative members. We currently have a tattoo artist that works out of Likewise. And what we've found is the more diverse that our member base is, the more excited they are to be there. We find people collaborating quite often with each other. And they tend to go next door to see if someone can help with their website instead of searching online for an outside company. So I think that's really the magic of a collaborative space like what we have. And I think that all of the local co-working spaces that we've seen, they all have something different to offer. And I think that's, part of the big selling point.
Makes for a cool vibe when everybody is not digital startups. You've got a whole variety of different professions and backgrounds and businesses that people are working on.
Absolutely. I kind of specialize in the providing an experience for people and thinking about different components coming together to create something bigger. I think that just in our Meet the Members coffee break that we have every Wednesday, we have people sit down and talk about any subject that comes up, and I feel like seeing that diverse group of people from different backgrounds talk about different subjects, everybody's being challenged constantly to consider other people's perspectives, and I think that just makes for, honestly, I think it feeds creativity and innovation.
No, that's great. That's great. And so, Mallory, as you think about the journey you've been through the last several years and the experience you've had with getting it up and running and sort of perfecting the business model, what's your take on what business models have worked best as it relates to co-working? Talk a little bit about what you do at Likewise as it relates to business model.
So for Likewise specifically, we definitely try to appeal more to small businesses, to freelancers, to startups, underrepresented groups that might have a hard time signing a 3-year commercial lease in another space. But we do also have established teams. We're not going to turn away, an established company. So I do feel like there's definitely a lot of room for a lot of different types of businesses.
And do most of the, and Zoe, this might be one based on your experience at New York, do most of them have sort of a tiered schedule where talk a little bit about that. I think that's
Sure.
instructive.
It's familiar, and it's all dependent on how much space the co-working building has. But, ideally, and what I've seen work well is a co-working space will have different tiers where, the most affordable option can simply be a hot desk model where you're able to come and book a space and just use that desk for the day. Up from that is a unique, standalone office space where maybe you have 4 walls and a door and you pay a bit more for that. Certain spaces have, a wings of sorts or suites where more people can work as their team grows. And it's nice, if you think about the business model perspective, to have that suite of offerings because companies can grow and see themselves transition from tier to tier as they become more and more successful.
That makes a lot of sense. Well, one of the things, I guess it's been instructive, looking at venture ecosystems for the last 15 years, we've seen some areas where before the ecosystem has been significantly developed, someone says, well, we need a co-working space. And those tend to be really difficult to get traction around just because they haven't done the community building first. An example I like to give of how that was done well is in Indianapolis, there was a space there that was called Speakeasy. And before they ever opened, and it kind of looks like a bombed out hangar where they put it, right? I mean, it wasn't a very glamorous space. But before they ever opened it, for a year, they worked through that brand name to get events going, get people out, get people interested. And when they actually opened, I think they had something like a backlog of 1,500 people that wanted to come in. So they already kind of had the revenue figured out ahead of time, rather than saying, here's the space and we're going to hope that we can attract people. Whoever wants to take that one, what do you think? I mean, for emerging communities that think they might need a co-working space, what's your best advice you would give them?
I would say to that point of your example, adding value on the front end and kind of, making those connections within the community, I think immediately to one of our friends and clients and Rogers and Low Loft, we did probably 2 or 3 events with him,
Sure.
Community events to where, knowledge share and connect before they ever had, the doors open in that space. So I think that's another good example of just really demonstrating that, to Mallory's point, kind of serving this specific community, rather than if you build it, they will come
Yeah.
and throw whatever dollar amount on the side of the building and hope that, enterprises will buy it all up or whatever else. But demonstrating value to the community that you intend to serve with that offering and resource.
Yeah, and Low Loft's an interesting one in that it's a little bit different than traditional because it's aimed at industrial co-working, to where if you needed to do light manufacturing or fulfillment, I mean, it's really kind of set up for that. So one of the knocks on open workspace is that it sounds good to have people in sort of a bullpen setting with open desk and all that kind of thing, but some people will say it's really been a knock on productivity. What's your take? How can a co-working space manage that need for both privacy and quiet space and being able to take calls? What do you think, Mallory?
I think if a co-working space is doing it right, then they have a variety of atmospheres within the same space. So for us, especially once COVID hit, we definitely saw our space go from a lot buzzier to definitely kind of library rules. If you were taking calls at your seat, it was pretty intrusive because it was a lot quieter. So now we have 2 main co-working suites that are kind of library rules still, and then we have a collaboration suite, which that's the room that people go to if they know they need to be talking on the phone, meeting with their team. We have some phone booths in that room that you can reserve in advance. If you know you've got a Zoom call at 2 o'clock, you've got a private space that you can shut the door and take that call.
And I guess you have every ability to kind of curate the clientele to make sure that they're going to be good citizens and follow the rules and all that sort of stuff.
Absolutely. Before we onboard anybody, we go through this full welcome guide and we kind of say, in this room, here's this policy, you know, this is what we do throughout the rest of the space. So I think if you're upfront about telling people what the guidelines are, everybody, we're adults, we play nice.
Right. Very good. So Reese, a question for you. Is one of the big attractants in all this the flexible schedule? I mean, is that one of the things that if you were to do interviews with people that are potential clients, is it the flexibility? Talk a little bit about the flexibility.
It can be, definitely. I think especially for our creative use spaces, there aren't a lot of flexible options. Like a lot of community studios they operate on a 9-to-5 schedule, which doesn't work for people that also have to have jobs on top of making. As far as the actual co-working space where people are coming in to work at a desk every day, everybody has different needs. And I think that kind of circles back around to what Mallory was saying. We've just honestly listened to needs and tried to fill the void whenever we see something that we haven't provided yet. Some people are really attracted to the 24/7 access memberships. But I think that mostly people typically, whenever you first approach them, I think the hardest thing about market education in this specific model is that people kind of think of it as a use of space, like I'm going in and they visualize a desk. But until they come in and use the space and like get to rub elbows with people and talk to a few people and get that community feel, they aren't quite sold on it yet. What we do is we offer a first day free for people. And a lot of times what we see is people will work out of the space for a couple hours. They'll find that they're actually really productive. They get up to get a cup of coffee and chat with someone for 5 minutes and sit down and get back to work. And by the end of the day, they're sold on the model because they've had the experience. So I think that's really the value add.
Gotcha. Zoe, please.
Yeah, well, I think something too that Likewise does really well, and I actually have to give you guys kudos because it inspired me to look at how we could do things better at Startup Village. With flexibility is this important pillar of convenience. You need to make the space easy to use, easy to book, easy to reserve, so people can anchor onto the security of knowing that they have this conference room booked or they have this, phone booth reserved. And your space reservation tool is awesome. I played around on the site and it actually led me to do research as to, how Startup Village can use that, because our second location, we were in a situation where we needed to kind of have that reservation platform. So flexibility and convenience, those kind of twin pillars are key, I think, to attracting people in the space. Likewise does it well. I haven't seen what Low Loft is doing in that regard, but I'm sure if you look across the various solutions to co-working, that digital convenience of booking space and confirming space seems to be key.
I've got another one that's a little bit different than maybe some of the things that we've talked about before. Is the Ledger building was built in Bentonville to be a bikeable building, and the assumption is that hopefully those people that are living in the increasingly dense Bentonville downtown area within cycling distance will just ride into work, and they've made accommodations for bikes and all that. I'm really curious about what's the typical transportation mode that most of your clients and your tenants use to get to the space. What do you think, Zoe? How are most of them getting there?
So for the Fayetteville space, one of the perks is that we have a really generous parking lot that's right next to the building. So people can drive, and I've never seen that lot full. Most people drive to that space. Some of the students who perhaps live a little bit closer to downtown, I have seen them walk. In Bentonville, it's a mixture. Some people are able to walk.
Yeah.
There's also a generous parking lot.
Yeah.
I have seen people bike. It seems to be the mode of choice in Bentonville. I have heard, and I'd be curious what other panelists think. People have a desire to walk. People have a desire to bike to our buildings. But unlike some others, we don't have showers. We don't have locker
Sure.
rooms. And I've heard from so many people how uncomfortable they get when they have to effectively exercise to
Yeah,
get to the
yeah,
space and
yeah.
then not be able to freshen up. And
Right.
so I think one thing that certain buildings in our region have done a really good job of doing
Yeah.
is building with locker rooms and facilities in mind so that people can rethink driving
Sure.
to where they're going.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and stay active. What do you see it likewise? Are people driving there and parking? Are they walking? What's
It's a
your take?
combination. There are some people who live really close to the area. There are some residential spots just super close to our building. We do have some people who bike. We do not unfortunately have showers, but that is something that we've wanted from early on, and we do have plans for that in the future, especially when it gets as hot as it's been lately. You
Right.
definitely don't want to get sweaty on your way in and then just have to be in the office all day like that. But yeah, we kind of see a lot of different things. I think that especially with the city's plans to try to increase the walkability and the bikeability of that immediate area around us, I think that's going to make a pretty big impact too on what we see as far as travel.
Yeah, that's great. And anything it can do in that regard, particularly if it's people that live within a few miles, if you can jump on the Greenway or jump on some of the extensions off the Greenway and get to a co-working location, it's super cool being able to do that. What do you think?
I think both kind of, that element and goes back to kind of the value of flexibility can be boiled down to, just the accessibility of spaces and resources. And we talk about, at Startup Junkie, the goal to remove barriers for folks to get to where they want to be and doing things like that. And I think that's kind of the ultimate goal of, some of these co-working spaces ideally would be to be accessible and to eliminate some of those limitations. That's kind of the goal.
Absolutely. Well, it's interesting. Startup Junkie team, we worked with one of our client companies that's also done a bunch of webinars out of Joplin, LifeWorks, to do personality assessments. And really, it's this thing called color code, where they ask you to answer questions with the motives you would have had when you were a child, which I think what a rotten kid I was and what a terrible thing that was for me to figure out. But there's this color code that comes up based on personality types and how you interact with others. So that kind of raises the question is, based on all your collective experience, what sort of personality types tend to thrive in a co-working space? What do you think, Caleb?
Well, given that I have some insight on the color code, reds and blues. So those are the ones that like to have some aspect of control. But I think they've got to be self-starters, individually motivated to an extent, because if there is a limited amount of oversight or traditional structure around to clocking in at 9, clocking out at 5 type of workplace culture, there's a level of kind of self-starter nature that one would have to really kind of choose to go to a co-working space and choose to sit in the quiet side and choose to put their head down and that sort of thing. So I think that definitely is, being a self-starter is a key element to that.
What do you think, Mallory? What kind of personality types tend to work best?
I think obviously, an extroverted personality is going to do well in a space like that. But we see a lot of people who are the opposite of that too. And we always tell people we're not going to force you to make friends. If you come in and you
Right.
don't talk to anyone, no one's going to be offended. And kind of like what I said earlier, if you're in a space that's setting up different environments throughout the building, it can make it really easy for multiple different personality types to all be able to be productive in the same building.
Sure, and a lot of freelancers and a lot of engineers are at best functional introverts. Me being one of them, right? It takes energy to do this kind of stuff, so it's nice for them to be able to have the kind of space and feel comfortable. And if they don't want to interact, they don't have to. I mean, for the longest time, I'd have great apprehension about being any kind of setting with a bunch of people I didn't know. It's kind of like, I'm going to go mingle over in a corner by myself. I don't really want to meet anybody new. But you get over these things, right? So, Reese, what do you think? Based on your experience, what do you see?
Oh, I agree with Mallory. We see all kinds. I think that one thing that we press really, really hard on the first time that, from the very beginning, whenever we tour someone on the space, we talk a lot about mutual respect and autonomy. So you don't really see people interrupting anyone at their desk. And we do have kind of a middle kitchen area where we always have a community puzzle going, and that's where our coffee and tea station and our snacks are, and where our receptionist is. So there seems to be like an invisible barrier on where that kind of behavior is more appropriate or less appropriate, and everybody seems to be very respectful of each other every day whenever they come in. So I feel like, luckily in our space, we have a very large footprint, so we have a lot of opportunity to create different types of spaces throughout the building. So whenever we see people all being extroverted in the middle kitchen area, and whenever they're back at their desk, they seem to have their head down and stay focused.
Gotcha.
So it seems like the differentiation in the spaces, kind of sets that boundary for people.
So this is the East Coast versus Heartland extension to that question. You might have big personalities in New York, right? You might have really outgoing, boisterous people, based on my experience spending a lot of my career on the East Coast. How does it work in those environments that you were in New York versus out here?
Well, with the big personalities also comes with a real comfort being direct.
Yep.
So
You don't have to listen for the encoded, well, bless your heart, right?
No, there's a very clear, please stop talking. There's a very clear, and maybe with a few expletives,
Right.
request of how you want someone to behave. But, I think that the co-working spaces that I frequented in New York, and this is just speaking of my own personal experience, I need 4 walls and a door. I need that. So I always opted for that bumped up tier
Sure.
where I could still be in a shared environment. I could still emerge and see people at the community table. We didn't have a community puzzle, but that is a brilliant idea and I love it. But when it came time to focus and produce, I could close my door. And I think because of that, I never really saw clashes. It's kind of amazing, to your point about everyone being adults. It's kind of amazing when you bring people together, the extent to which we all can respect one another
Sure.
without issue and without too much instruction. To your point, though, about personalities and
Right.
kind of digging in there a little bit more, I've heard a lot of panelists talk about introverts and extroverts. I see co-working as universal. A personality type, if you would call it this, that I think is really interesting, is the person that has a renewed sense of sacredness of home as the sanctuary, not home as a place of work. And if you think about what's happened over the past couple years, the home has become, work by osmosis just flows in and out of the home in a way that it hasn't before. And I speak to a lot of people who are interested in our offerings and our solutions who simply want to keep their business, their projects, their ventures, their side hustles outside of that very special place that they consider home. And I really resonate with that as well. I do not like working from home because I do not like to blur or blend the compartments of my life and the buckets of my life. And when I talk about that with the members that use Startup Village, they share that very much too. So I'm not sure kind of how that falls on the
Sure.
introverted extroverted spectrum, but it's more of a, perhaps Caleb, I think it was you that used the word control, a red, or was it a red?
Red
It was
and blue.
control, to control space and to control setting plays an element in these choices too.
Control over your time, right? So that you can be present in whatever it is you're doing. I mean, the electronic leash that we've all lived with for the past 25 years has made that really difficult, but that makes a lot of sense. Compartmentalize and take control of your time. It's a great insight.
And just setting boundaries there too, like the ability to set those boundaries, because I think there's a lot of behavioral science emerging, post-COVID, to that point around people's inability, even when they don't want to, because they've done that, they've worked from home or they worked from the bedroom, that it just naturally becomes something they think about in that space again. So at some point you lose the ability to set that boundary because your mind's turned on. It's like, well, I typically would respond to emails until 8 o'clock from the kitchen table, so why not continue? I guess a firmness and directness in setting those boundaries.
I'm gonna turn around a little bit. I mean, there was a lot of fanfare with WeWork, and that it was almost there was sort of a fraternity or sorority feel to it. It was a big deal about the kegerator and all of that kind of stuff. And I mean, I think we've learned there was a lot of pomp and circumstance around some of what he did that wasn't really based in a good financial model. But it does raise the question to kegerator or not to kegerator in co-working spaces. So what do you think, Caleb?
You know my answer to that. We drank a six-pack before we came here.
Yeah.
I think it depends. I mean, for us, it works because we are not necessarily a member base. It's kind
Right.
of a team dynamic. I like the idea. But yeah, I haven't been in the proximity of places where that's gone wrong. So
Sure. Mallory, what's your take? How do you do it at Likewise?
We do not have a kegerator.
We take it one can at a time.
It's one can at a time, okay.
Yeah.
But you do have alcohol available if they want it, is that right, or no?
We have some different areas in the fridge that are, this is shared, this is.
You can bring your own if you want.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then we do happy hours as well. One thing that we try to do is anytime we have an event where alcohol is mentioned or featured, we want to make sure we have equally attractive non-alcoholic
Sure.
options as well. We always do cocktails and mocktails at our happy hours, and it's just a nice time for people to be able to do that off the clock. But no, technically, as far as like providing alcohol during the workday, we do not have a kegerator.
I don't know that it's true, and it's completely anecdotal, but I heard from someone recently, we were talking about alcohol versus non-alcohol, that particularly millennials and Gen Z that are in the workplace are drinking less. They're looking for a non-alcohol option. I don't know if that's true.
It's definitely true.
Is it true?
Yeah.
So I mean, there may be something to that. I think a lot of the shine has come off of having to have all that, but not for some of us that still enjoy bourbon and beer,
Right.
but we may be of a different age demographic, me in particular. But anyway, that's interesting insight. And Zoe, university's got some restrictions, right? But what's your take? I mean, you've seen it from both personal use in New York and the university side.
Man, it was so fun to have a keg in the co-working
Yeah.
space because, again, it's that natural letting loose and enjoying, an afternoon once I emerge from my cave, or once people are ready to just kind of start entering into that separation of work mode to more personal enjoyment, having the option to drink really anything, having the option to just commune together over food, alcohol, whatever, but just to have an offering in the space, I think is important because it brings people together that might not otherwise merge in that space. Startup Village does not have alcohol, and that is due to just the myriad restrictions of being a university office, and they're, I think, frankly, quite understandable reasons to avoid that. It also opens up liability in big ways. Another thing to mention is I think co-working spaces are always doing this dance between amenities and cost, and finding that balance of what you offer to your members while keeping it an accessible, affordable alternative is a dance that everyone at this table and probably every co-working leader across the country needs to make. While I personally enjoy the keg, I don't think that if I am a paying member, I would want to really pay a premium that it's available.
Right,
So,
right, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, good insights on all that. Well, so co-working's been around, as we said in the very beginning, for a really long time. Let's talk a little bit about your crystal ball and where you see the modalities of work going in the future. So Zoe, we're going to start with you again. You've had experience with it, both on you had your space when you were in New York, you're now involved with running one. If you were to project 5 or 10 years down the road, with all the things that we've learned from the pandemic and where you see things going, the future of work, what's your take? What's the future going to look like?
I think the future of work is a hybrid model. I think what COVID made clear is that you can run companies and you can work asynchronously. It doesn't work perfectly. It needs to be managed, but it can work. And I think a lot of businesses discovered too how elegant and wonderful it is to not have the overhead cost of a large office. So I think hybrid is the future, and hybrid is really being requested not only from kind of the employee base, but also corporate headquarters or kind of leadership. Sure, there are examples of some companies that are becoming more and more strict with the return to work model, but even in those instances, flexibility is still very much a pillar. One thing I think about a lot, though, for the future of work, when I think about my career history, the culture, the branding, the ornaments, the furniture, the art on the walls, that kind of sensual experience of being in an office that is the identity of your company, I'm going to miss that. And I think it'll be really interesting to see how companies promote identity without having a physical space that is theirs to control. I don't know what that's going to look like, but I think hopefully we will see some innovative ways to think about that branding and feeling even beyond a static.
It's definitely caused kind of seismic concern within the commercial real estate market, because a lot of the Class A space, if it's not designed for hybrid, it's not designed to be flexible or whatever else, you're not going to win as an employer if you mandate everybody has to come back in. I mean, I guess if you're maybe soon to be the first trillionaire and you've got infinite funds and multiple companies, you can mandate that. The rest of mere mortals are competing for that talent, and they're not, I don't think they're going to be able to do anything other than support hybrid, as you said.
But what I would love to see is if more, leaders or HR teams consider, okay, we're going to save X on rent.
Yep.
What would it look like if instead of spending, just for easy terms, instead of spending $100,000 on rent this year, what would it look like if we gave employees a stipend to spend on a co-working membership? Or perhaps, if they prefer it, to make their home office what they really love. That wouldn't be my choice. I would want that separation. But what if we just encouraged employers to rethink the distribution of what they would spend on rent and put the power and the autonomy and the choice in the hands of the employee to decide what works for them? And what would that do for productivity? What would that do for bottom line?
And that really works if you're outcome oriented.
Right.
A lot of the people running large corporations are my age or near my age and older, and we all grew up in a be there early, stay late. It's like it didn't matter if you were mashing out license plates or whatever you were making, people wanted to keep an eye on you. Sort of Frederick Taylor, scientific management, you got to keep an eye on the people doing the work. I think this last 5 years in particular, and particularly the pandemic, it proved people can be pretty darn productive and you don't have to mind them, particularly in a digital setting. So interesting. So Reese, what do you think? What's your take on it? What's the future of work look like as it relates to co-working?
Well, while we're talking, I'm also thinking about being in the restaurant world this entire time whenever it got turned on its head. And I feel like everything's kind of following the same trend. You just get to pick your problems, right? I think the restaurant industry got hit really hard during COVID, and I think very quickly, because of how volatile it was, employees really put their foot down about what they needed, and kind of pressured employers to look at you know, human beings from this holistic approach of like, what do my employees need to be able to thrive? And it seems like people mostly, instead of being as worried about someone punching 40 hours on the clock, it seems like people are more concerned with their employees being inspired and excited to come to work every day. So I feel like I would agree it's going to continue to go towards the hybrid model. And I think that no one wants to sit in the same box every day, without any kegerator to look forward to in the afternoon.
Well, and the thing that's interesting about the hybrid model is, and particularly if employers are outcome oriented, is people can decide when they want to go in. So if you
Right.
want to avoid a commute in a congested area, don't go in during rush hour. Go in and drive during times when it's not busy, which is a lot of time what I'll do. I'll work from home early in the morning, wait until, not that we have any real rush hour around here compared to anywhere else
Correct.
in the planet. I spent a lifetime, I could see my eyes flashing before me on the Capitol Beltway for a long time. And out here, people are like, oh my God, the traffic to Bentonville. There's no traffic here. There's none. It's not the same. But still, being able to pick your spots and go into that co-working space when you want is great. And that requires, I think, the maturity on the part of the employers. But Mallory, what do you think? Add your 2 cents.
I echo all of that. I think that we're already seeing companies being a lot more flexible with what their requirements are. Some people want to be able to work from home on Tuesday when they have their kid, and then, when they are in childcare the next day, go into the office or whatever that might be. But just having that flexibility to not just be in the office all day, every day, I think is huge. I do think that the future of the co-working industry is really fascinating right now. There's a lot more spaces opening, and there's a lot more spaces that are becoming even more niche. And you've got some that are focused specifically on wellness, and they have gyms. I think that we're going to see a lot more of that, where there's a different type of co-working space for every person, and it's not just kind of a generic co-working space. And I think we're already starting to see it.
No, that's great.
Yeah,
What do you think?
I agree that the future will be hybrid for those that are able to be hybrid. And I think the employers that kind of are stubborn about that will learn the hard way, as there is that competition for talent across the board. And I think it does speak to post-pandemic employees putting their foot down in the sense of wanting that quality of life for themselves, and kind of demanding that, and that level of expectation for quality of life. And companies that want to recruit, the most motivated, talented employees are going to have to be mindful of quality of life as they think about that. Whether that's, are they sitting in traffic all day long? Just think about the impact of just completely eliminating traffic from your day as a quality of life aspect. But in regards to it being hybrid and missing the office, when I couldn't come to the office, I absolutely wanted to go to the office. After a period of time, I was like, okay, I would like to be around my coworkers. I would like to be in the office. I want that level of structure. But having the choice and the autonomy to, choose when you're going to be most productive in this space versus most productive in that space, I think puts you in the best position to, thrive and be motivated and have outcomes. And I think a lot of companies need to be more mindful of measuring outcomes instead of measuring hours, because I get the sense there are plenty still out there that would rather measure, a time frame versus what that time frame produced. So
Well, it's easier.
It is
Yeah.
It's
easier,
easier to
right?
count
Yeah.
than it is to be really thoughtful.
And output measures are essentially vanity metrics, and they
Yes.
don't equate to outcomes for sure.
Yes.
Well, so another one is, I think about the future of work, and I think about the co-working model. There's been lots and lots of discussion for the last 4 or 5 years about employers or facilities or communities figuring out what to do about childcare, because it's a ponderously difficult problem that inhibits people maybe being as focused and as effective at work as they could be. What's your respective take on whether or not that's something that co-working models will eventually include? What do you all think?
We would love that. We're like, how do we get a doggy daycare and childcare in here?
Seriously though, is that something you could see
Absolutely.
adding to the model? Maybe you
For
partner
sure.
it out, but some way of
I think that would
including?
be a game changer for the.
It really would get people that may be forced to stay at home with pets or companion animals or kids, and they can get the benefit of the co-working.
Absolutely.
anybody doing that yet I know probably not around here, but have you heard of anyone that's included that
It
kind of
is
stuff?
happening elsewhere. I don't know if anyone locally is. I think a lot of us are pretty confined to our existing spaces,
Sure.
so that makes it pretty difficult. But there definitely are models that are doing it successfully elsewhere.
When we did some of the what I would call community or customer discovery, thinking about the next 5 years economic plan for Fayetteville, that came up repeatedly. There has got to be better solutions for childcare for working professionals. So I was just curious. Zoe, what do you think? Did you see that kind of stuff evolving in New York?
No. Well, New York, you don't see a lot of young professionals with children.
They put it off, right? Until
It's
they get
put
to some,
off.
yeah.
It was actually really quite eye-opening for me to move to Fayetteville and just live in a community where people start families earlier than I was used to. And in fact, I hate to admit this, but it's true. I had a first experience managing a team where I managed a mother for the first time. And I learned so much about how difficult it is to stick to a schedule when you have a young child. And I think earlier in my career, as early as maybe 5 years, I found myself getting somewhat frustrated with colleagues who had children who couldn't maybe stick to meetings or who came in late. And it wasn't until I managed someone with a child and understood that our country, frankly, is not doing childcare well, that you have to have a much more compassion as a manager, but also there needs to be some really thoughtful work on how to make childcare better. I think having it attached to a co-working space is awesome if you can build that into your program. It's not something that I was familiar with in New York. It's not something that I saw.
I believe there are resources out there that probably are highly underutilized for getting certification for at-home daycares and stuff. We did some workshops around that during COVID, and just some of the resources around starting daycare facilities. So what does that look like in kind of, if there are resources to get certified to run a daycare, how do you marry that with co-working effectively? I think there's opportunities that are out there. I don't know that anybody's tapping into that just yet. That and universal pre-K.
But part of what made me think about it was as I drove through the construction zone for the new Walmart home office, I noticed they had this big sign that said P Street Childcare, and so they're being really intentional, apparently building that in. And again, that's a corporate HQ, not co-working, but it just made me wonder what you all thought about it. Audience, any questions? I think we have exhausted our list. What do you have?
I wanted to know what you guys thought. Shareholders of companies probably have been, some of the larger companies probably have been a big stumbling block as far as migrating more people to working from home or working their own schedule. They're like, we have to answer the shareholders, and we can't account for being here, and blah, blah, blah. So, do you think that's going to be a huge roadblock?
So I'll give a perspective, and I think we've seen all different variations of that, but particularly in the high tech, high salary rate, technical professions, if they don't provide hybrid and don't allow for remote, they're losing the war on talent. Those people will go to the 50 other companies that do provide the flexibility. And one of the consequences of that someone brought to my attention recently is there's this issue called overemployment now, where really critical tech staff might have multiple W-2 roles with multiple different companies as full-time. Now, I don't know if that's a real problem or if that's an imagined problem or if that's really a driving productivity, but it is odd to me that one of the stats that came out of the pandemic when everybody was working remote was there was huge savings, obviously, in business travel, and they found out that a lot of the business travel, conventions and all that stuff was completely unnecessary, kind of a waste of money. It was boondoggle. And they also found out that productivity went up for a period of time. People were getting more done with less distraction and less commute. So I would turn it over to the rest of the panel. What do you think, based on that question? What are employers and shareholders going to have to say about it? What do you think?
I think just to the point Zoe made earlier about having the company sit down and say, hey, this is what we can save in you know, going hybrid, having a reduced footprint, you know, in a corporate HQ or something like that. I think there is enough opportunity to identify the pros and how they would outweigh the cons associated with that. And, you know, a lot of that is just educating, you know, that those pros exist, because sometimes when there's some antiquated thinking around that, they're not, you know, it's not as obvious to others sometimes. And so educating them on, hey, there are these lists of benefits to doing it this way versus the way it's always been done, sort of thing.
What do you think? What are the shareholders going to say? Any idea?
I think people are always resistant to change, but if the end goal is productivity, then I will always, you know, stand behind believing that an inspired staff will do more for you, you know, in my experience.
And it doesn't have to be anecdotal, right? I mean, there's measures that are age-old, whether you use balanced scorecard or something else, where you can have financial measures and new product innovation and whether or not you're on schedule. I mean, there's lots of controls you have that can say, yeah, this hybrid workforce, this remote workforce is still getting it done. And here's how we know. And they show that to the board of directors or the shareholders. What do you think, Zoe?
Show me the dividends.
Right, right.
If I'm still getting dividends, I don't care how they got there.
You know, it'd be interesting.
You know, and I hate to sound crass about it, but I put a lot of trust in companies to decide what is right for them. And I think as much fear shareholders can put to a board of directors, every company has its own internal drive, a ferocious drive that doesn't need the extra pressure from shareholders to do well. I'm not sure if I said that quite eloquently, but
yeah.
I think there's enough momentum and desire to achieve and win and show it in the form of value that shareholders perhaps are not focused on this. I would love if there's any article or anything that you've seen where shareholders are bringing up remote work policies. I'd love to read that. I haven't seen it. I don't doubt that it's there, but I'd be curious about that perspective. But as someone that does sort of own stock in companies that have really embraced remote work, I'm fine with it, so long as they show me the dividends. SMD.
And something else you said about not being in a place where you had like your company's brand everywhere. I know some companies are prisoners of their brand and would be afraid to lose that if they had people working outside of the building with the branded coffee cup and the branded podium or whatever, you know.
You can take the brand with you, though, right?
Yeah, you can. Who would need that? You know, I know some companies are kind of prisoners of their brand and they don't want to lose that. And do you think that would be an obstacle, again, to anybody migrating to coworking?
I don't think so. I think, you know, if the goal is to kind of engineer loyalty to the brand and be advocates of the brand as an employee, I think taking care of the employee is going to seed more loyalty and advocacy, you know, by taking in, you know, accounting for that quality of life aspect. You know, if the company's taking care of my quality of life, I'm going to be an advocate for them, and I'm going to, you know, rep that brand in my co-working space or in public or, you know, wherever else. So I think that's kind of
On
an
TikTok.
important aspect. Yeah.
I think it's the strength of the culture determines it. If you feel like you have to provide a lot of oversight and there's a lack of trust, it's a good sign of a weak culture. Strong culture, people will do what they're supposed to do because they take pride in what they do and they're in it for the team. So I think cultures make a lot of difference. And I think places with strong cultures work well when they're all together, and they work well when some of them are dispersed or remote. It's a function of the culture being that connective tissue that holds it all together. Any other thoughts on that one?
I guess the one thing that I might add is, you know, if you think about companies that have been really vocal and visible about the beauty and the wonder of their office, sometimes that is a distraction from what inherently is a weak idea, a weak product, a weak culture. And it would be interesting, you know, if we see this continued decline of HQ, right? How perhaps the strength of products or ideas or innovations will increase because there isn't so much energy going towards the ornamental. Not as much energy going towards the exterior, the gloss. You mentioned earlier you enjoyed WeWork, the show of WeWork, right? And I mean, WeWork is a perfect example. It's a co-working space. It's a beautiful space. I think they did a lot of things right in building community and bringing people together. But their downfall too was excess, an excess of, I keep coming to this word ornaments, but I think it's a great way to describe what some companies over-index on, ultimately to their demise, and ultimately in a way that hides perhaps a fundamental lack of innovation, good ideas, consensus.
You guys all have co-working spaces that are, you know, beautiful and everything works and there are fun things about them, but they are orderly and they're run in a business model. And WeWork was not run in any kind of real business model.
It was like the Delta House
Yeah.
from Animal House.
Yeah.
and you know, I think it was more about the founder having promotable hair and being cool and selling shares rather than having a good business model.
I think going back to your comment about culture, that culture kind of, it goes with you regardless of whether you're in a, you know, the space you lease or anywhere else. You know, I kind of feel that way about Startup Junkie. There's certain things, and it's not like the brand, it's not the S or whatever, but it's something that we might do. It's an activity or an aspect of, you know, a program we're putting on or something where, you know, somebody might comment and they're like, oh, Startup Junkie would do that, you know, that kind of thing, where it's like, that's part of the brand in my opinion too. So,
Yeah,
I mean, when it's operated positively, there are, you know, those examples of when it could be carried out outside of the confines of an office where people can identify, you know, the brand outside of that traditional sense.
What else?
You have covered everything I had questions about, I think, without getting into anything really deep and philosophical. We can do that after we're not live streaming.
Okay.
So, I just want to thank you for coming here.
Yeah.
And letting
Thank
everybody
you.
know about the world of co-working. I'm very curious. Thank you.
Thanks for having us. This was a lot of fun. And thanks to all the panelists. Good conversation. So, and I guess now we...
And everybody come to Startup Crawl next week.
Yeah, come to the Startup Crawl September 8th.
Yeah, feel free to promote.
Very good.
Go for it, Caleb.
Already did. I'm just kidding. Well, startupjunkie.org, Startup Crawl tab. Biggest startup party in the heartland, over 70 startups, 10 stops, 14 breweries, one Grammy-nominated platinum-selling artist as headliner. Combined, 2 bands have over 2 million streams a month on Spotify. Yeah.
Kind of what South by Southwest was in the beginning
Right.
before it got blown up and made terrible. which
We're,
I'll never
we're,
attend
we're
again.
marching towards North by Northwest. Yeah.
We've had a couple of patrons. I had patrons today, actually, a couple that already have their tickets and they're really excited about
Awesome.
it. So,
It's going to be fun. Thanks for having us.
thank you.
All right.
Thank you.